Welcome to Chatter, a podcast from The Gist. Today on the show, we're talking to American documentary maker Jen Senko. While we're talking, we covered a whole load of topics, including Trump's use of Twitter, Fox News and the right-wing media, her documentary The Brainwashing of My Dad, as well as safe spaces and PC culture. If you enjoy the show, you can rate us on iTunes or wherever you find your podcasts, share us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and tell your friends about the show. So without further ado, here's the interview.
It's nice to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
First episode for us.
Congratulations.
Of many, hopefully. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, just to start with? How you got into documentary making, how you became interested in Fox News in general, and the right-wing media?
Sure. I was an artist. I went to Pratt, and I tried my hand at all kinds of things. I drew all my life. I was always super interested in movies. I would lose myself in movies, and I would kind of live them in my head for days. I even went through a period when I was singing country western in my 30s. And I gradually became political. I actually went through a phase where I was reading Ayn Rand, and it was a good antidote to my having been raised Catholic, because me being raised Catholic, I was taught to have absolutely no ego, don't feel good about yourself, and since I always wanted to be the best at whatever it was I did, I really didn't feel good about myself. And then here comes Ayn Rand saying you have to have the virtue of selfishness. Anyway, and then I had a boyfriend who helped me think that out. So then I started becoming political, and I wanted to do a project that would require not painting about really independent women, because I felt like I needed the inspiration. So I picked up the camera kind of as if it was a paintbrush, and then I did my first documentary called Roadmap Warrior Women. But I was still working full-time at a presentations job. And, then Clinton got in. I kind of felt like I didn't like what was happening in the country. In
terms of Clinton himself?
No, Reagan. Because what happened is I left New York for a while, and when I came back a few years later, Reagan was in. And then suddenly I used to think that politics, whoever you voted in, didn't really make that much of a difference. But then, after Reagan came in, I noticed tons more homeless, obviously mentally ill people on the street. And I was like, holy shit, politics do make a difference. Yeah. So that's when I started paying attention, and then eventually along the way, my dad started changing. And when he moved and he had a longer commute to work and started listening to right-wing radio, I noticed his personality change dramatically. He became angry, he became belligerent, he became combative, he became evangelical about his new beliefs. And when emailing came in, he was always trying to convince the family that, Clinton really was going to try and go for a third term. He was going to take away all our guns. The same thing they said about Obama, they said about Clinton. So that's when I really started paying attention. And in the meantime, I did another film called The Vanishing City. It was also socio-political. And then finally, I felt like I had always wanted to do this film, because I just felt so passionately. I felt like if they can do this to my dad, this is happening to the country. I felt like Clinton. I felt that the country was already moving to the right. And I felt like Clinton couldn't be any more to the left than he was, or else he wouldn't have gotten in. So I felt like this whoosh was happening, and so anyway, after I did The Vanishing City, I said, okay, I'm ready to do this, the brainwashing of my dad, and because it was kind of like my way of ringing an alarm. I don't feel like I'm that articulate. I don't feel like, I have the platform. So I knew I could make a film. And that's how it came to make The Brainwashing of My Dad. I don't know if that was too much detail or not, but there you go.
That gives a fantastic sort of introduction in how you arrived at the documentary. So, like, one of the first things I wanted to ask you was about the impact that Fox News and sort of more extreme right-wing outlets have had on the right wing of political discussion in general. Because, like, personally, I think one of the biggest tragedies has been that it's very hard to talk about issues that the right actually care about that are more legitimate now, that without them being lumped in all together as one large block. One particular interview comes to mind was with Sam Harris and Bill Maher on Bill Maher's show, and they were discussing fundamentalist Islam with Ben Affleck and a couple of other pundits, and Sam Harris was trying to have like a legitimate discussion about the cultural differences and the sort of ways that radical Islam isn't compatible with more liberal ideas of like freedom of speech and like freedom for women, and that he just wanted to sort of discuss how we should deal with that in terms of dealing with Saudi Arabia and Qatar and countries like that on an international stage, and how we should talk about that in our own countries. And he was very clear that it was like the doctrine that he was wanting to discuss, not the people. And Ben Affleck just didn't really seem to take that on board. And I feel like that happens a lot, and it's not just with that particular issue, but I feel like you almost can't have a discussion about right-wing ideals without it being labelled as just extreme right propaganda almost at times. Like how do you see that impact? Do you think that's legitimate, or do you...
No, the way you explained it, I totally see your point, but I think that the right, in their pursuit of having one party rule, really created this mess that they're in. They were so bent, as in, you can see if you understand the Lewis Powell memo, on gaining one-party rule, selling the free market ideology, that it's almost like liberals and progressives are shell-shocked. I think it's in their nature to listen and to not immediately lash out, but I think after a while, it's like being backed into a corner. Now they're just not going to hear anything. They're so pissed off. We're so pissed off. And I do try to listen and see if there's a good idea in there, because I don't think that we all need to agree on every little thing. And like you were saying, this guy, had a legitimate point, but instead Ben Affleck, I didn't see the show, but no, I'm assuming...
I recommend you go and have a look at it.
Yeah. I like Ben Affleck, and I like his politics, but I could see him just assuming, this is what happens. Like assuming I know where you're coming from, because we're so divided into tribes. We are tribal. Humans are tribes, and the right's idea was to divide and conquer and separate us, and they've successfully done that. So now we can't talk to each other, and it's a very dangerous place to be in.
Oh, I totally agree. The thing that I think is missing at the moment is kind of a lack of compassion when discussing political decisions, because as much as there's always rhetoric and there's always like political points to be scored, and I understand that that's how politics is, like part of me really enjoys the jousting and the back and forth, but when it comes down to the difference between, for example, the healthcare issue in America at the minute, when it comes down to millions of people potentially not having access to healthcare, or people not being able to get by on minimum wage, and that sort of issue, I feel like we've become so polarized that we can't come to a consensus that there is an issue and we need to deal with it and like discuss how we're going to deal with the problem. We just sort of argue about whether there's a problem or not. And there's actually a really fantastic interview that I listened to with Avik Roy, who's a conservative healthcare policy writer, and Ezra-Klein, who's the founder of Vox.com. And they had potentially one of the best discussions about policy I've heard in years, because they are both advocates for universal healthcare. They just differ on their attitudes as how to get there, and I feel like that's honestly something we've lost because of the divisions and the sort of tribalism that has been caused by the I think, what was the phrase used, the right-wing noise machine?
Yeah, the right-wing noise machine.
Yeah, so really, I kind of wondered if you had any thoughts on how we row ourselves back from that precipice, or is there a way that we can get back from this point that you see, or what do you think?
Well, it's really tough. It may get worse before it gets better. I'm afraid to say that. I hope that that's not the case. But what you were saying, you started out talking about compassion. I just wish that compassion could be the focus. And I'm so disgusted with the majority of Republicans in this Congress right now who, what they've done really is side with the billionaires and the corporation. That is where their bread is buttered. Okay, so we have to get money out of politics. There's several things we have to do. We have to get money out of politics, or this is going to keep happening. We have to reform the media. We have to bring back a form of the Fairness Doctrine, a form of the Telecommunications Act. That was reformed, quote unquote, the Telecommunications Reform Act. We got to get it back to what it originally was, so that you can't have media consolidation. You have to fix voting suppression. And gerrymandering, voting suppression, cross-check. I really highly recommend Greg Palast's documentary called The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, that explains what this cross-check, and now Chris Kobach is the Secretary of State in terms of voting. And then there's the personal approach. We really have to talk to one another, even though it's really hard. Like, I can't tell you how many times I see people going, well, I unfriended him, I unfriended her, oh, I blocked that asshole. Well, yeah, they're assholes, and I get them, believe me. I get people saying, yeah, your movie is stupid, and your father is just weak-minded, or whatever, or this is propaganda. And instead of going, yeah, you're stupid, I will say, you try and deactivate the amygdala. You try and deactivate the reptilian part of the brain that's in the fear and the anger mode, and bring it to a human level. Like one guy, I said, there were two guys like going back and forth in Facebook about my movie. One guy had seen it and the other guy hadn't, and said, I won't see it. So what I did was I played the one guy against the other. I said, well, I thank you, Steve, for at least watching it. I think that's really highly commendable. The fact that you disagree with it is fine, but at least you saw it, whereas John didn't. Shame on you, John. You know, like I mean, each person has their own thing, but like with a relative too. Like somebody was saying on Facebook, like they heard this old lady in a waiting room saying, "Oh, poor Trump, he's just been picked on the most, and we can't let these Mexicans in." And the guy said, "I just stopped talking to her and I walked in." Well, you know what? By doing that, yeah, maybe you saved yourself a little bit of discomfort, but you allowed that woman to be the loudest voice in the room. So, which brings me to my Fox off cards, if I may, for a moment. My mother lives in a retirement community, right? So, if you walk into a doctor's office, a restaurant, a bar, and you see Fox News playing, you don't not say anything. You say something. And if you're too chicken to say something, or it's just whatever, it's not comfortable, it's not appropriate, we actually me and Hear Yourself Think, made these Fox off cards, which we sell for like 50 cents, to people that they can leave, saying, do you know that Fox is divisive? Here, and then on the other side, here's some facts you can check out about it. And one of those facts, by the way, is that Fox News viewers know less than people who watch no news at all. It's a Fairleigh Dickinson University study. So there are things that we can do, and there are a lot to do. There's the long-term goals, which are legislative, like bringing back the fairness doctrine. Campaign finance reform is extremely important. The personal level. Then there's also something that we have to do, and that is write to the media of your choice, whichever media you watch or listen to, and say, can you please cover this? Can you please cover cross-check? Can you please cover gerrymandering? Can you please cover the fact that Trump just made it legal to kill bear cubs and wolf cubs in their dens? That's not known.
Really? I
yes.
know that. Like I like to think I'm pretty up to date on what's going on, but even I didn't know that.
Yeah. See, I get all these emails from all these different, like Democracy for America or Move On or Indivisible or Our Revolution. I've had to weed a lot out because I get overwhelmed and then I can't think, but at all. But the news that you get from that is totally different from the news you get on MSNBC or NBC or ABC or even in the newspapers. I mean, it's all Russia all the time, which I'm down with the Russia thing. I mean, that is an important road to take. It's not the only thing that's happening. And maybe if you reported on some of this other stuff, like people are allowed to kill bear cubs and wolf cubs, other people would hop on board that aren't just into the Russia thing.
Yeah. The Russia thing is such an issue because there's all these dots and a couple of different lines.
Yeah.
Like it's just trying to wait essentially to see the extent of what exactly has happened. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in speculation and like talking about how many people are going to go and be wheeled off to jail, where I do honestly think that there has to be a completely bipartisan investigation. But I think the healthcare issue is far more pressing right now. And
yeah,
the fact they had three bills, none of which did anything close to what they wanted them to do, and yet they were still happy to attempt to push them through. And like, I just feel like the the
And
demise of the policy making process is
Yeah.
more important right now than
yeah,
the potential collusion. Like I
Yeah.
think that there was probably some pretty sketchy meetings and activities that have gone on. There's some ties that, like financially, from back in the 80s and 90s that again are sketchy to look at, but we don't have the whole picture now, and I think spending ages speculating on it is a waste of time at the minute when there's so many more pressing issues that we have to deal with, like climate change and the healthcare issue and
climate change. Yeah,
like things
Yeah.
that are being like sort of pushed aside to worry about
yeah,
Russia. And as much as the Trump administration is like completely denying and wanting people to talk about, like claiming they want people to not talk about Russia, it's doing them a service and it's distracting from a lot of potentially horrifying things that they're trying to do.
Mm.
But then
Mm-hmm.
I struggle to tell whether it's like strategic or whether it's just there's so much going on that there's just no way to tell what we should be focusing on.
My thought is that in terms of whether it's strategic or not, this is what I wonder. I wonder if they borrowed from the formula, finally a little bit from like Fox and these right-wing news outlets, and figured out that anger is titillating. Anger is exciting. I myself get caught up, with MSNBC and Rachel Maddow, because I feel like I'm watching an intrigue every night. Like, oh yeah, okay, what did they find out now? It's like I'm reading a book, but then I realize that can't be my only source because I'm missing all these other things. And like you said, they're really important, and they don't talk about climate change. To me, is the most important issue of the day. Because if we don't have an earth to live on, then what does any of this matter? Nothing, and that's why I say one thing we all have to do, which the Republicans did after that Lewis Powell memo came out and think tanks evolved. They had rooms of people, guys, just emailing, writing letters to the media saying, liberal media, liberal media, liberal media. And the media started responding and becoming more to the right because that's the complaints they were getting. Okay, see how the Congress is responding to the people who are out there, complaining? I mean, if they weren't there, they would have passed this health not care bill by now, but people like, if I may divert for a second, when after Kerry lost, quote unquote, to Bush, there was vote stealing going on then too, and that's proven, and I wish they'd report that. I started my own little media group, like just a bunch of us in my neighborhood. We got together, about 8 of us, and we'd watch or listen to different news shows, and then all of us write together and explain. So you get your own little group together and say, hey, you know what? Let's all write to ABC because they didn't report on this, or they made Trump look good here, or whatever. I'm sorry, but it seems like a small thing, but small things add up.
No, I totally agree. And I actually wanted to ask you, to what extent do you think the sort of the shift to the right has been caused, obviously the amount of money that's been poured into think tanks and into publishing houses and into just supporting the Tea Party in general is like pushed the country to the right. But to what extent do you think that's also the fault of the Democratic Party for putting up weak, sort of more centrist Democrats instead of trying to counter them with equally sort of to the left, or even just like where America would consider to be to the left?
Yeah.
People like Bernie Sanders, like there's clearly people out there that are incredibly passionate about the guy, and he clearly like stirred up a lot of feeling of resentment towards both parties. And he's not the only one as well. Like, Lisa Murkowski, I think, is a fantastic example. Like, as a write-in ballot in Alaska against the Republicans, and she won. Like that, I think that's really like a.
I didn't know that she was a write-in ballot. I didn't know that.
Ballot, yeah. So that's probably why she has a little bit more leverage with being able to vote against the healthcare bill, because she owes nothing to the Republican Party. I think that there's clearly a desire out there for a different kind of politics, and how much do you feel that the Democrats have been poor in trying to combat the shift to the right?
Okay.
Whereas I feel like they've kind of just been pulled along with it to an extent.
Yes, you're right, and they have been pulled along, or rather pushed along. Yeah. I think, and maybe this is giving them too much credit, or not enough credit, but I think nobody knew this whoosh. No matter what you think of Hillary Clinton, like her, don't like her, whatever, she fucking nailed it when she said there's a vast right-wing conspiracy, and everybody thought she was insane. But you know what? There was. It's proven. You can source it. I can give you millions of sources. There was. And I think that the Democrats, kind of being lambs in some cases, I think almost suffered from like a Stockholm syndrome. Gee, we have to be more like them. They're pressuring us. I mean, imagine being criticized by your friend, right? Or by, someone, and you're not expecting it. And it seems like there's all these people saying, well, you should do this, you should do this. It's like, and the whole country's moving in that way. Well, we better be more like them. And they wimped out. They were really wimpy. And it pissed me off, because I would say, like, for instance, with language, okay? Like George Lakoff. You're familiar with him, right?
Somewhat, but.
Oh, okay. He's the liberal progressive Frank Luntz. Okay. Frank Luntz, created language. Language matters. Language for the Republican Party. Okay, so for instance, like clear skies for Bush, right? That was supposed to be clear skies, but environmentally. But it was the exact opposite, kind of Orwellian. The government-run healthcare, okay? Government takeover of healthcare. That was a Frank Luntz thing. He poll studied. So what do Democrats do? They use the same language. They used the Republicans started saying Obamacare. What did Democrats do? They started saying Obamacare. They didn't have the same psychological, social understanding of how people respond to words. They were just they're like children blowing in the wind. Well, I don't know about that analogy. I just pulled that out of my ass. I don't know. But, I think that a lot of it was like being slapped silly and just sort of reacting rather than acting. And they do need to grow a pair and have more people like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or Keith Ellison. But I will say this, there's a caveat, which is you do have to take into consideration where that Democrat is coming from. For instance, like West Virginia, I can't stand that guy. I forget his name at the moment. But again, he's running in West Virginia. So you're not, yes, have somebody else go there and push more, like Bernie, and push more of those values. But you have to put up someone who's going to get voted in. So.
I know it is a tough line to walk There was a couple of things actually I wanted to sort of question you about what you said there. The first of which was, I just wanted to also point out that there's obviously an extent to which Democrats have followed the money, and that's pushing them towards the center.
True.
Potentially more than just following public opinion.
No, you're right.
Just
you're right.
Following the money, obviously.
You're right.
Then the other thing I wanted to mention was your point about the right-wing conspiracy against Hillary Clinton. I think that's personally one of the issues that has become impossible to talk about, because it's very difficult to criticize like potential corruption within Hillary Clinton's like foundation or within like the State Department, or because to what extent you believe she's horrendously corrupt is obviously dependent on your own views, but there was questionable and shitty activity going on with the DNC primary, and she had a long history of being sort of condemned by the right wing, and I feel like she was almost this poster child for condemnation, to the point where so many people in the country disliked her that she couldn't be a credible candidate, and the Democrats went ahead with it anyway because, again, that's where the money was.
Yeah, they wanted her. Yeah, that is where the money was, and they also want to play it safe. They appeal to who they really have no core principles in general either. I'm very, very disappointed with the Democratic Party, but unfortunately we're stuck with two parties. But also I have to say, when Hillary talked about the vast right-wing conspiracy, I don't think it was just about her. I think she was talking about the whole vast right-wing conspiracy, which embodied, the think tanks, the pulpits, the language, the money going into influencing how people thought about the free market. So, all that was happening, and to me, that's what I took that at, not just the hunting of
herself,
the president, herself and Bill. Yeah,
that's an interesting way of looking at it.
That's how I took it. But the Democrats. See, what Michael Moore said is, we have to change. We have to get in there and take over. He said, they already have the fax machines in the offices, So, because I think to start a third party, that's just, again, like too long-term of a goal. So in the meantime, I think we have to try and infiltrate the Democratic Party, and I think that's happening a little bit.
Yeah, to what extent do you think the Better Deal sort of program, the economic platform that they're now putting forwards, is a potential program that could counter the sort of more extreme right wing ideals that have become electorally popular? Do you think that's a turning point for the Democrats? Do you think this is an admission that they need to have a more working class economic message in order to win back those voters who have been won over in rural states? Or do you think it's sort of more of a token rhetoric that won't really get very far?
What are they putting forward? I don't know.
So they've just proposed a platform called the Better Deal.
Great name.
Yeah. So it's
the Better Deal.
Yeah,
can I take my nap now?
Yeah. But they're proposing minimum wage increase and like better trade deals and that sort of thing. Something that I think they were particularly poor on during the election.
They were what on?
They were poor.
Quiet.
They were just. I just felt like whilst they had those messages in their policy platform, they didn't push them enough.
Yeah.
In that Trump had this economic message that Clinton just, in my mind, didn't have an answer for.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
may have had the answer in policy, but they didn't have the answer in the debates. And I just honestly felt like that was what lost the election for them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, here you have Americans who they lose their jobs, right? You know, whatever, their jobs are being outsourced, like my job and my colleagues who worked at all these financial companies and did PowerPoint presentations and whatnot. We'd be training our own people, and we'd be training the people who were going to take our jobs in India. Okay. Okay, so you have people who lose their jobs through outsourcing. Then they can't find another job. Then when they do find another job, it doesn't pay as well as their old job. They saw that their parents or whatnot were able to support their family with just the father or, you know, one family member going to work. Healthcare is hard to get. It's not often what it was anymore. You used to not even think about healthcare. And then if you didn't have a job, like when I didn't have a job, I still don't have a job, but when I didn't have a job, healthcare was just horrible. Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act came, no wonder they call it Obamacare, came along, and I personally was saved. I'm thankful every day for that, but I know it's not perfect. It's really, you know, it's got some places that real holes in it. Yeah. And oddly enough, the Heritage Foundation came up with that. So it's ironic that that's what I mean by the country moves so far to the right. And that's also speaks to your point about saying that maybe some ideas that they have that might work are just ignored flat out because the trust is gone. Okay, but so you think of all of this stuff, like, you know, even the little stuff, like you call your phone company or your cable company, and you get someone who doesn't speak English, you can't understand them, you're on hold, you're listening to lousy music, the question doesn't get resolved, you have to take time off from work. And then, you know, you have someone who comes along and says, okay, well, you know, Rush Limbaugh has the answers, like Fox News has the answers. So anyway, yeah, these things, the Democrats didn't talk about. And here comes somebody like, you know, a used car salesman, selling shitty cars, saying, I know your jobs were outsourced. That's not going to happen. Trade deals, that was horrible. And yeah, that was stuff that Democrats fell for. Clinton signed the NAFTA, you know, and Hillary was going to be for the TPP. Just, to me, trying to be more right, to the right, but like you say, also that's where the funding is coming from. They weren't bringing, I think they weren't bringing up these things because maybe their heart wasn't totally in it.
Yeah.
Too, like you were saying, and it should be. We should. I'm a Democrat still because I'm not going to be a Republican, but well, they aren't what they used to be. You know, years ago. It's like a crazy, horrible party now.
No, we've had a similar sort of thing happen in the UK where the Conservative Party and the Labour Party are our two biggest. We have a couple of other smaller parties. We have the Scottish National Party and the Liberal Democrats that sort of take up maybe between 50 to 80 seats depending on the election and whatnot. So that they still have like a smallish voice in Parliament, but they don't have a huge voice. But what is really fascinating to me is the Labour Party, who were like the grassroots, working class, pro-union party for decades, for like their entire like lifetime, have started to lose working class voters to the Conservative Party, who to me seem to be against everything that should be in their interest, aside from, in our case, Brexit. And I find it fascinating that's been mirrored on both sides of the Atlantic, when the conditions and the issues are really quite different. while there are similarities in a lot of things, like I just find it amazing that even over here, where there's not the same amount of corporate influence in television news, at least, we have quite a corporate-owned like news media in terms of like newspapers and
Murdoch, Sinclair. Mm-hmm. Murdoch's there too. He's in Australia as well.
Yeah, he's everywhere. Our TV news tends to be better in my opinion. The BBC, whilst being occasionally biased, are a great source of information, and Channel 4 News are full of fantastic investigative reporting. So like I'm thankful that we aren't quite at the place that America's at right now. But I really find it fascinating that we've got to that point on both sides of the Atlantic. And I just really, I wonder what point, if at any, that's gonna start to flip back. Like, do you have any thoughts?
Well, this is why I made my movie. Because I hope to get everyone to see it so that they understand that by listening to these newscasters who act like they're angry and they're right with you and they understand your pain, are actually selling you snake oil. You're being bamboozled. And, not to insult them or anything like that. It's hard to do research on your own, but when the thinking is done for you and it's done in such a entertaining, exciting way that makes you fearful and angry, then people hop on board. And I don't want to judge them. I want everybody to understand this massive brainwashing, if you will, done through and by a few multi-billionaires, like Murdoch for one. How should one man have so much power? Like, fuck him. Who's he to decide what he wants us to think? Doesn't he have enough money?
I totally agree.
Enough cute women?
Well, hopefully, as long as net neutrality remains in place in both countries, probably will, because I think that every time they try to touch it, people flip out and start screaming, and I think just as they should. And I think if they try to touch it in the UK, there'll be mass protests. But I think as long as we manage to keep a hold of that, the independent media, like our...
Yes. Yes, you're doing a great thing.
Like
Thank you.
We're trying to just bring a bit more of a different voice of something that people aren't going to read elsewhere, and I think,
and by the people.
Yeah, and there's been in the UK especially the left wing more than the right, in terms of independent media, have really sprung up in the past 18 months. There's a couple of outlets, the Canary, Evolve Politics, Novara Media, Another Angry Voice. There's numerous outlets that have gone from 0 to hundreds of thousands of followers online,
right.
And I think it's really indicative that there is this rejection of the mainstream narrative, and that people are open to and looking for something else. And I think that gives us cause for hope.
Yeah, I do have hope. They're fighting back, but we have to fight harder. We have to fund people like you guys. Doing your podcast is great. You're not backed by a corporation. It's truly independent, and I think we have to support our independent media as much as possible, because there's nothing else in it for them. I mean, you're not sitting in a mansion. I don't want to blow the whistle on you, but let's, there's only one piece of art hanging up behind you.
You mentioned something that you used, a phrase you used in the documentary there, and something that was from the Roger Ailes memo about putting the GOP on TV, but people
Mm-hmm.
were thinking done for them. And I had
Right.
sort of two questions about social media about that. Do you think that social media has actually made that easier for people because they have this constant stream of opinions that they can just be like, yep, like, or yep, retweet. Like they don't even have to consider what is being said. They can just regurgitate it within seconds.
Yes.
And do you think that that's
Yeah.
accelerating that process?
I think that it's brought the sound bites right to them, yes, in an easier way. But also, I've observed people talking right back to them and saying, really? Where's your source? Or, I mean, liberals are just usually better arguers. So I've seen them be shut down. I mean, unless they're just into saying, I know you are, but what am I? Childish taunts. That it does open themselves up for questioning. Yes, it does provide them in a like a buffet of these alternative narratives. However, it works the other way too. Okay, we have our social media. I learn things that people post. They'll post something and I'll say, oh, I didn't know about that. Let me look at that. And then thanks for telling me. I have spread word about my film through social media. And in turn, there's a lot of people tweeting about the brainwashing of my dad. And more people now have seen it since I and the people involved in the film have been just personally tweeting it like what is that expression, word of mouth, so social media is also like word of mouth. So I just see it as sort of being like maybe equaled out.
Okay, no,
a little bit.
I would probably be inclined to agree with you. I'm personally of the opinion that the internet is both fortunately and unfortunately a pretty accurate reflection of society.
Yeah.
So, you have to, if you want access to all this information, you have to be willing to accept that people are going to try and distort it for their own.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other question I had actually about social media was, you talked about Richard Nixon's mastery of TV with the help of Roger Ailes after he lost the election to Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask, like, how much you think that Trump's mastery of maybe not social media but of Twitter is a mirror of that sort of triumph of new media in a way, or do you think it's a completely different case?
I think it's related in that, let me go back a little. Okay, Richard Nixon had no television appeal. He was not even charming. He wasn't likable. You put him up against Kennedy, who's handsome and smooth, and Nixon is sweating. And, fortunately for him, but not for the rest of the country, he ran into Roger Ailes, who's like, look, dude, you have to get with the program. TV is where it's at. 59% of people watch television, and they're going to get their impressions from how you act and how you look. Okay, so the main thing, if I had to boil it down, would be, among many things that he taught him, was coming across as if you were authentic. Okay, I think that's why people believed Trump. They thought because he was crude, because he spoke like maybe they spoke, that meant that he was authentic. He wasn't beating around the bush. The same thing can be said, speaking of Bush, about Bush, is he came across as authentic too, because he didn't speak English in full sentences. which made him seem like, oh, he's just like me. It's the kind of like to have a beer with. So people believe that if you're not real educated, then you're one of them. And that must mean you're a good guy. That must mean you're authentic. That must mean you mean what you say. So that brings me back to with Trump tweeting. With him tweeting and saying all this stuff like fake news, he's providing that. They're thinking he's still like being authentic. He's being this victim. He's telling it like it is, and it serves him with his base.
I think
yeah.
his use of Twitter is almost more impressive in its ability to anger his opponents rather than even be what his base wants to hear. Because every time you see a Twitter rant,
yeah,
I just immediately go like, right, what else is going on today? Like what, like his tweet, was it yesterday or the day before, about the transgender?
Oh yeah, the day before. Yeah.
I was just baffled at, like, he tweeted that, and then it came out that the military hadn't agreed it. He hadn't consulted them, so there was really no authority on it.
Yeah, they're not doing anything about it.
No, so, and what happened yesterday was the 3 failed healthcare votes.
Yeah.
And to me that happens every single time, and he does it brilliantly. One of our co-founders is in awe almost of his like ability to manipulate the media to like talk about what he wants in a lot of the time. And personally, I'm still trying to figure out where the manipulation and the like distraction ends and where him just ranting about things starts. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm still trying to work out to what extent it's him just getting angry and tweeting and getting loud about it distracting from things, or whether it's like a planned and like conceived, like, right, how do we provoke outrage to distract from X? I just think it's going to be a while as well before we truly get a look at it. I think Sean Spicer's memo will be or his memoirs will be.
Is he writing them?
Wow.
If he does.
Yeah, I was listening to something that's about how, if you're an ex-administration person looking to get credibility back in the political world, what do? You write a tell-all memo where you pretend to be the person who was fighting against all the bad stuff that was happening.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if he will actually come out with a book, but I'm sure there will be plenty of literature written about this period in history.
Yeah. Well, in response to where he's really coming from, it's almost like, is he some mad, brilliant person, or is he just an idiot firing neurons in the form of tweets?
Yeah, like, this is where I struggle to like discern, because he doesn't seem to have any interest in learning about like convention or policy or anything that I would associate with like what is required with running the country.
Josh, what do you think of this? Do you think that maybe he's responding, he's acting intuitively, like he's learned how to operate in real estate, swindles, and, how to maneuver, and so, a lot of it is intuitive, like instinct. Because he's not a really deep thinker. And George Lakoff actually says, oh, don't underestimate him, he's really smart. Smart, I would kind of maybe, as much as I admire George Lakoff, I would kind of disagree slightly. I think his smarts is intuitive, instinctual. It's like a tiger that's learned how to go after a chicken. What do you think of that?
No, I think you could well be right. I saw Scaramucci, the new communications director, his interview with the BBC.
Yeah, you mean Joe Pesci?
Yeah, Joe Pesci. To be honest, I think he is, in my mind, what the Republicans want as a president. Like, I honestly see Scaramucci as like the embodiment of what they begged for, almost. Because prior to Trump, they wanted like an outsider, someone who would tell it like it is, someone who would project their narrative, a strong man. And honestly, I feel like he ticks a lot of those boxes. But what he said in the interview was, admittedly, he didn't understand the economic desperation that Trump tapped into. And
Scaramucci didn't?
Yeah, he says that he didn't get it. He said that he felt he now feels he was in his bubble, and he didn't understand, like, the whole Trump movement when it started, and the feeling that he was tapping into. And to your point, I think that could well be very accurate in that it's a more intuitive intelligence rather than like a considered strategic sort of response to everything.
Yeah. That makes sense. It makes sense to me. Yeah.
The other question that I had was, what do you think is so attractive about Rush Limbaugh? Because I went to stay in Albany with some family friends for a couple of weeks, about 6 months back, and the husband of the couple I was staying with was a big Rush Limbaugh fan, and he's quite a staunch Republican, but I don't see him as someone who is susceptible to being told what to think, and I see him as someone who's quite considered and like, while he holds his beliefs, that they're all very much grounded in fact in a lot of ways, and maybe it's a slight misinterpretation of what he believes, but like, he's very much a sort of libertarian, free market kind of guy.
Yeah.
But he says that he loves Rush Limbaugh, and I'm curious as to what you think the appeal is to a lot of people.
Well, Rush Limbaugh is supremely confident in himself, and confidence is really attractive. And again, he provides answers for people who are in pain. So people kind of, or maybe they're not even in pain to begin with, but it's like when you go to a football game or a baseball game, if you're into that, going, see that, you're right, Russ, you're right. He exudes no doubt. He also speaks to people as they are, as if they are part of his tribe. You're in his club. He's on the radio. So when you're listening to the radio, Steve Rendell said on my, the movie, The Brainwashing of My Dad, there's an intimacy. So you feel like he's your friend. He's talking to you, and you are in the know because he's your friend. And it's like a boys' club too, in that way. He's this white fat guy who's not afraid to say, like, to disagree with what liberals are telling them. You have to change, you have to allow women into the circle, you have to be kind to minorities, you gotta live a little, you gotta share a little. And he's just come right out and saying, no, you don't. That's bullshit. Like my dad, believing that I don't have to wear a damn seatbelt. Rush Limbaugh told me that Ralph Nader makes up that stuff. I don't want to have to listen to these people telling me what to do.
Well, that was conventional wisdom in the 60s, was that seatbelts restricted motion, and by keeping the motion going, you were less likely to get harmed. like that was the theory behind not having to why there was no seatbelts, is because it was all about the fluidity of movement, and that seatbelts were more damaging because they were gonna hold you in place violently if you were in a crash.
Who came up with that?
Obviously, that doesn't seem like a sensible piece of thinking to us now, but that's what the what some of the thinking was back in the day.
Yeah, he makes people angry, and that anger is exciting. The anger is addicting.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Personally, I find that I have to, I went through a period when Trump was just elected, and I just woke up every morning and just was it's very easy to get sort of sucked into that, constantly being angry at the world.
Yeah.
Anyone, not just for people with more sort of right-wing views.
Yeah.
And it's very much, you've got to take a step back at times and try and, realize that this isn't impacting your every single second of your life.
Yeah.
That it's important to realize that whilst things could, there's injustices and there's things that we need to speak out against and protest against, and that there's issues that have to be fought, but that there's no need to carry that anger in every second of your day.
Right. That's really well said, and that's so true. And so far it's been only Fox News watchers who will, the older people that are retired, that will sit and watch 5, 6, 7 hours a day, all day.
What's the average viewing age? It's 69 or something like that.
That's the average, yeah. But, and that was Murdoch's intent. There's this Fox News veteran, 14-year former anchor, Tobin Smith, who I found, somebody sent me his article that he wrote, and he it's blowing the whistle on Fox and saying that Roger Ailes said, let's go for the audience 55 to dead. We want those guys to jump out of their lazy boy chairs and shout at the TV, and then we'll set you up with some lame Democrat, and then at the end, here's all your talking points, and then you'll win, and they'll shout yay, you really got that libtard. That's what they call liberals. So, yeah.
Another thing that actually fascinates me is the way that the word liberal has become an insult.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to take it back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then arguably, the people that get labelled as liberals these days aren't actually classical liberals. In a sense, they're a more modern version, and that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah. Yeah.
The one other thing I actually wanted to ask you about was, you talked about concerns that the Republicans had in the 60s about the kind of radical left taking over the universities, and that was something that they seriously had to address, that they were losing the younger generation.
Yeah.
And do you think they've clearly they've been successful in cultivating a generation, but I'm skeptical as to the level of which that's set to continue, because at the moment the Republican Democrat split is very sort of rural versus urban. There's a very clear correlation between age now and sort of voting preference.
Mm-hmm.
And the universities are again being accused of being taken over by liberals and by the radical left. And I feel like it's not that we've come full circle, but I feel like they're still having to fight those battles. So yeah, so like, what extent do you think that this is something that they have been successful on beyond like that one generation? And do you think that they can manage to repeat their success, or do you think it's something that the younger generations are sort of less susceptible to at this point?
Fortunately, you mentioned you were going to ask that question yesterday, so I got to think about it a little bit because I didn't have any thoughts on that. And I don't know for sure, but I would say that the university influence that they had hoped to make was probably maybe one of the less successful ones. Not that they weren't successful in many areas, but I just would surmise that it's because college, young people that go to college, this is sort of where they learn to think independently. You know, they're among different people. They're not with their parents. They're allowed to bring coffee into their class. You know, suddenly they are, you know, treated like grown-ups, and they're taught to think independently, and they're exchanging ideas with other students more. So maybe they're learning to think independently. And then B, you can't make a lot of money being a university professor. So I think that you still have teachers, people that are dedicated to the craft of just teaching and thinking independently and studying. You know, where there's money, they'll try and figure out a way.
I feel like at times it can, just as they point out, that it can, in the same way political correctness can be damaging, that safe spaces can be seriously damaging to open discussion and to free speech in general. And I do think that at times that the right have a point in that we have to sort of be careful as to what we say people can and can't say. Because I'm all for people not being, you know, called horrendous racial or sexist slurs, or like I feel that there's no gain to be made by that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to talking about like different ideals, and like, I feel like there's a lot to be said for entertaining and listening to ideas that you maybe wouldn't otherwise consider. Because personally, I can imagine if for example, if you were in a university today and someone like Rand Paul was like espousing that like saying healthcare as a right is like slavery. And while I completely fundamentally disagree with that, I feel like it's important for someone who actually thinks that to discuss it and to bounce it off people who have completely opposite ideas. And I feel that there's the potential to lose that if we're not careful about it. Yeah,
I agree. And somebody like Rand Paul is not, though, Ann Coulter or Sean Hannity, who are there to divide. I mean, there's aspects of Rand Paul I respect because I think he's not going along with that, the groupthink. And these are really his beliefs, which many I vehemently disagree with.
Oh, no, but I totally agree. Like
but to have him explain that point of view before people get out of college and then hear it, I think people should be open. Colleges should be open to that. And I don't really understand the safe space thing. I'm not sure what
Basically, like the whole idea of a safe space is that, you know, no one's gonna insult you or hurt you here. This is like somewhere where you're amongst people that are gonna be nice to you. And I totally think that. Is
that in a room or?
Generally, so for example, I went to a couple of poetry slams while I was living in Canada, and they would say at the start about how this was a safe space. It wasn't for people to get like angry or heated or just insulting essentially. And while I agree that because a lot of the subject matter that gets actually put down you said at poetry slams is normally quite heavy.
Yeah.
From what I've experienced anyway.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really lovely way for people to be able to explore like things that they maybe are scared to talk about in other places, that they feel that they can like just be accepted. And I think that's important for like, especially given the like mental health issues that young people are having more so nowadays. But I also think that that sort of safe space ideal is like permeating just political discussion, and I feel I just feel it's a slippery slope, and we have to be careful where we draw the line.
Yeah, I think the pendulum can always swing in both directions, and it's important to be objective and to strive for some balance. And I don't mean like balance at the cost of truth.
No, I don't mean like CNN sort of political theater. It's more of a like if you were trying to espouse that there should be no income tax and there there should be very little regulation and that sort of thing in a university today, that I don't find it too hard of a stretch for people to say that they would probably be condemned in places for those views and maybe just shut down before they have a chance to, reason and debate those ideals. And whilst I don't agree with them, I'm always willing to sit down with someone and try and get to the heart of what their beliefs are. And I feel that.
And what kind of a forum are you talking about? On a personal one-to-one basis, or
like in classes, or in like just forums for debate and discussion, like in class and lectures, tutorials. It's like I said, it's a tough line to walk and something that's difficult to draw the line at. But I think there's need to be careful of where like PC culture and safe spaces take us as a society.
Yeah,
it's very much the same as that the right wing don't listen sometimes to like nuanced arguments from the left and sort of scream and shout, and I fear that at times that the left can do the same to the right. I think it's really important.
That's for sure.
To not get to that point where you can't have an opposing view.
Right.
Obviously, there's issues where like it's clear cut and dry, where one is going to be horrible for people and one is seems like more reasonable. Like with the healthcare debate at the minute, like if you were the argument that Avik Roy made about the healthcare bill was that he felt that it was a huge step towards universal healthcare through free market programs, but that there was obviously still issues to address. I would go and recommend you listen to the podcast because he explains it much better than I do.
What's his name?
Avik Roy, Avikroy, and it's a discussion with Ezra-Klein.
With Ezra-Klein. Okay.
So he and obviously he was sitting there being like, look, this bill would not insure enough people, anywhere near enough people. It would lose 15, 16, 20 million people off insurance, depending on how you weight the individual mandate in terms of its sort of encouragement for people to sign up. But his point was that look, the deductibles in this are monstrously high. That is a huge issue with the bill. But if we fix that, then that could push up enrollment rates, and that could find us a free market way to get universal coverage for everyone. And I just feel like it's important to be able to have that sort of discussion.
Yeah, because then you learn. I mean, because you might not understand what the arguments would be if somebody said that to you. So you get to hear, like, maybe Ezra-Klein took the opposite point of view. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
he was very
and
much
then
in
so.
opposition.
Yeah, so you get to hear that, and then you understand, why that isn't good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to draw.
Yeah. But I just want to say, maybe in some respects, safe spaces might be good, with the recent Alex Jones calling for going out and actually killing liberals.
Oh no, Alex Jones is a nutcase who lost every ounce of credibility many years ago.
Yeah. I'm wondering, can he be arrested for that? Isn't that like yelling fire in a movie house? Inciting violence?
He'd probably claim free speech.
Sure.
I agree. There's a place for safe spaces to be used. I just think it's careful to.
Yeah.
We just have to be careful that doesn't become the norm for all discussions.
I agree. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's everything I wanted to talk about. It's been great having you on the podcast.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed the chat we've had.
Me too.
If anyone hasn't seen your film, The Brainwashing of My Dad, I would highly recommend it. There's a fantastic twist ending. And,
thank you. They can see it on Amazon Prime for free, or Hulu, or iTunes, or YouTube, or if you want DVDs, you can get the DVD on Amazon as well.
Thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed the first episode of Chatter, we have many more fantastic interviews coming up for you over the next few weeks, including Gavin Bakewell of Friends of the Earth and Kellie Armstrong, the Northern Irish MLA. So until next time, thank you and goodbye.